Hey Eagle fans, it's EaglefanKarl. This is going to be my reaction to the Eagles' loss on Sunday to Detroit and my prediction video for tomorrow night's game against the Green Bay Packers. Since we're on the short week, I just thought I would combine these two videos. If you just want to listen to the prediction, I will put a link below in the description so that you can jump ahead to that point in the video. But let's first turn our attention to the Detroit game, and boy, this game was a gut punch. It's a game that when you're looking at the schedule, you're figuring, all right, that's a win, and you don't even really think twice about it. You're playing Detroit at home. That should be an easy win, you would think. But for whatever reason, the Eagles picked a terrible day to have just an absolutely terrible performance. And Detroit was good enough that they let us give the game to them. Because I'm a firm believer that we lost that game. We could have clearly won that game, even with all the mistakes we did have. There was still opportunities to win it at the end, and we just lost that game. This was not a game that we got beat. We beat ourselves. Let's go ahead, though, and look at some studs and duds. With the losses, I'll start with the good first and talk about some studs, some players that did perform well despite the fact we lost the game. And I came up with three guys that I thought had decent games. Number 3 is going to be Malcolm Jenkins. He was one of the guys on defense that was making plays. And then, of course, he has the big block of the field goal. He'd be higher he might even be the number 1 stud on this list, if not for the fact that he also has the block in the back, which gets the return on that out of field goal range, which obviously is critical later on. So that's just, right there, bang, bang, a great play and a mess up in the same play, but that was just sort of a microcosm of the way the Eagles' day went. But I still think Malcolm Jenkins had a solid game, so he's going to be my number 3 stud of the week. My number 2 stud of the week is going to be Jordan Howard. I don't know why the Eagles weren't using him more, but when he was being used, he was performing well, and he was doing everything that was asked of him. I'll get into the issues later about, why he wasn't being used more, but to suffice it to say, when he was being used, he was doing a great job. He has the touchdown run early in the game, for that matter, I've got to say that Jordan Howard plays a solid game. He's my number 2 stud of the week. My number 1 stud of the week, though, is going to be Carson Wentz. Doesn't turn the ball over and has a good game stat-wise. Was he perfect? No, he wasn't perfect. He didn't play a perfect game, but he did everything you can ask a quarterback to do in that game in terms of trying to win it. It's just his playmakers around him were coming up short. I know there are some fans that want to blame Carson Wentz, but when I look at the way that game went, I can't place any blame on him. I thought he was one of the best players on the field, and his play showed that, and his stats showed that, and for that reason, Carson Wentz is my number 1 stud of the week. But with a loss, there's plenty of blame to go around, and there's lots of guys that we can criticize. So for the duds of the week, I came up with 5 relatively easily. And I have a guy that I want to talk about that I didn't put on the duds list, but I want to talk about him because he almost deserves to be on the duds list, but there might be health concerns that are causing that, and that's Fletcher Cox. When you're, one of the highest paid defensive tackles in the league and you are considered a perennial Pro Bowler kind of player and at that caliber, then you can't have a game where your quarterback and your punter both have more tackles than you in a game. That just can't happen. I know they're double teaming him. I know, health-wise there's some question marks, and that's why I'm not going to put him on the duds list. But still, we need the Fletcher Cox that makes plays regardless of the fact that he's getting double teamed, and we haven't seen that this year yet. And my guess is that means it is something related to his health. But let's look at our 5 duds of the week. My number 5 dud of the week is going to be Nelson Agholor. He'd be a lot higher on this list if it weren't for the fact that he has the 2 touchdowns. So he was one of the ones that was actually helping us get back in the game when we were behind. So for that reason, he's not higher on this list. But the drop that he has in the first half, the fumble when he's not even contacted, that's just kind of stuff that it's just shades of where he was, 3 years ago. And it's just, we can't have that Nelson right now, especially with Jeffrey and Jackson both out on that game. He needs to be the number one wide receiver. And while he isn't our number one wide receiver, he at least needs to be mistake-free. Maybe he can't make all the plays that those two guys can, but as long as he's not costing you in ways like dropping the ball and fumbling, you don't mind that. He didn't do that, and for that reason, he's got to land his way on the duds list, even if he does score the touchdowns. My number 4 dud of the week is going to be, I think it's Andrew Zendejo. It could also be Jonathan Cyprien. There was two guys that I think had a shot to get the runner on the kickoff return. And I don't know exactly who's to blame there, but, it's one of those two guys that is really to blame for that, that missed tackle. There's also potentially some other guys as well. Not being a coach and knowing exactly how that coverage works, I'm not going to sit here and say for sure it was one guy over the other. Also looked like Sweat might have had a chance to get him later on, and he doesn't, but that clearly wasn't his lane if you looked at the way they were running down the field. Those are the guys that were on that side of the field that clearly should have been at least containing him more or making the tackle or whatever, and they didn't. So for that reason, those two guys, I think, have to get on the studs list. Or the duds list. That was such a critical play. We finally score on an opening drive. We have a little bit of momentum, and then you give the points right back and give them the lead, actually. That's just inexcusable, and you can't have that happen. My number 3 dud of the week is going to be JJ Arcega-Whiteside, and obviously it's just for the drops, and especially the drop at the end where it hits him in the hands, where it's going to be maybe a touchdown. Certainly you're going to be in field goal range there. He needs to bring that ball in, and there's other ones throughout the day that he was sort of missing the whole time. So for that reason, he's going to be my number 3 dud of the week. My number 2 dud of the week, I don't care if he's a rookie or not. You can't fumble the ball like Miles Sanders did in this game, and he puts it on the ground once, and then a few plays later he does it again, and he just needs to wrap the ball up more and recognize that he's not in college anymore. And you couldn't really tell on the second fumble because there was a lot of people around, but on the first one, clearly he's just not covering the ball up like he needs to. And that's something that, I know he's a rookie, but that's something that you've got to understand, that that's more important than getting a few extra yards. You've got to make sure you're covering up. And you've also got to realize that guys are a lot faster in this league. So where you don't think there might be a guy near you, guess what? If you're in any kind of traffic, you've got to cover up with both hands, because there could be a guy behind you that you don't realize. There could be a guy to the side of you you don't realize. So if you're in any sort of traffic, you've got to make sure you got 2 hands on that ball. For that reason, Miles Sanders is my number 2 dud of the week. My number 1 dud of the week, though, whenever you have a loss like this, I think you have to place blame at the top. And for that reason, I'm going to put Doug Peterson as my number 1 dud of the week. There were some things that he did that were fine, and he can't control, obviously, if his guys are dropping balls and stuff like that, especially when they're the backups. But at the end of the day, there was ways you could have avoided some of that he didn't need to be in the situation he was in to begin with. First of all, the use of the running backs. Miles Sanders fumbles the ball. You dodge that bullet by recovering that fumble. Why is he right back out there? I know you want to instill confidence in your young running back, and you don't want him to make him feel like that this is going to be a problem, that he's going to get benched every time he fumbles the ball. But maybe keep him out for the rest of that series. Just to let him know that this is important. He doesn't need to be right back in there a couple plays later, and then he fumbles the ball again. So I think he needs to be told that and needs to be sat down. You couple that with the fact that when Jordan Howard was in there, he was doing well. So why aren't you using Howard more in those situations? And for that matter, why'd you even get Howard in the first place if you're not going to be using him? He seems to be very underutilized, and I really question what the Eagles are doing in that instance in terms of having, what they're doing with Howard or not doing with Howard. That I really think that, Doug needs to look at that situation more and really needs to decide exactly how he's going to use his running backs in the best way, because what he's doing now, I don't think is good. For that matter, I also think they just got away from the running game too much to begin with. They were way too pass happy. This was a team that I think you could run on if you really wanted to, and they just never really tried to establish a running game. When they did have some extended drives where they were running the ball, they were having success. So I don't know why they got away from that. I know in the second half you're trying to play a little bit of catch up, sure, but there were other times where you got the ball back, where you could have run the ball a few times and you just don't, and it just makes no sense as to why you're playing that way. So for that reason, Doug's got to be on the duds list just for his from getting away from the running game and the way he uses his running backs. Another thing I've got to criticize him for is a strategic decision he makes late in that game. There's over 2 minutes left, and they go for it on 4th and 8. I know we love the gunslinger mentality Doug usually has, but I don't think it makes any sense there. You've got all your timeouts and the 2-minute warning, so you have plenty of opportunities to stop the clock if you punt it back to them and stop them. There's no reason why you need to try and go for it there. It just makes no sense. If it's a different situation and it's 4th and 1, 4th and 2, and there's more options for you as an offense, so the defense has to play it more honestly, that's a little bit different. But on 4th and 8, they know you've got to throw the ball. It's going to be very easy for them to defend it. It makes no sense to go for it in that situation. You've got to punt that ball, stop them, get the ball back. If you don't make it, then you're in field goal range already for them, and basically then you've got to get a touchdown instead of getting a field goal. Now, they got lucky with the blocked field goal, so Malcolm Jenkins bails Doug out in that instance, but ultimately it should have never come to that anyway. You should have been punting that ball back to them and then hopefully making the stop like you did and getting the ball back. That's enough about that, though. Let's get that game behind us, and let's turn our attention now to tomorrow night. The big game, obviously, in Lambeau Field, going on the road to play the Packers. And this is just sort of an odd game. From an X's and O's standpoint, there's big problems with this game. Aaron Rodgers against our secondary, that's a huge problem. There's also problems just from the fact of how beat up we are. There's also problems from the fact that the road team is always sort of at a disadvantage when they're playing on the short week like this. So there's a lot of factors that go against us in this game. Another thing that sort of goes against us in this game is Green Bay has never lost in Lambeau Field on a Thursday night game. So that's another strike against you right there, is you're playing on that short week. You're playing against a team that never loses in this situation, and they're a good team. It's not like you're going to catch them in a year where they're having a down year. They're a solid team. They're 3-0. So clearly the Packers, they might not be where they were a couple years ago, where they were always a Super Bowl contender, but they're certainly a good enough team to be contending in that division, to win that division, and they are a potential playoff team. So for that reason, it's not like it's going to be a cakewalk that way. Now, before the season started, when we did our prediction video, I said I thought the Eagles would win this game, and it was sort of one of those that I thought that, there's always a game where you're going to win that you think you're not going to, and there's always a game you'll lose that you don't think you're going to. In this instance, obviously, that was the Detroit game. We already got that one out of the way. So hopefully we don't lose a game later that we're supposed to win, like I had us losing against Buffalo later on. So hopefully that doesn't happen. But in the meantime, there's usually one game you lose that you're not supposed to, and usually one game you win when you're not supposed to. So for instance, last year, when we lose the game to Tennessee, we're not supposed to lose that game, but then we go to LA and we beat the Rams when we're not supposed to beat the Rams. So there's always sort of these weird dynamics that happen throughout the course of a season where you win games you're not supposed to and you lose games you're not supposed to. So for that reason, that's why in the preseason video, when we were doing our W's and L's, I picked this as a win, despite the fact that the situation, you would think this would be a loss. There's another situation, too, to think about. Green Bay is 3-0, but we're 1-2. So there is a desperation factor in this. And sometimes the more desperate team wins these games, even if they aren't the better team or are the more talented team. So lots of times those types of things do come into play. So I do like the desperation factor in this. The Eagles are going to be desperate. Green Bay may overlook us a little bit as a result of that, thinking that they, as wounded as we are, and as the fact that we lost to Detroit this past week, that we can't be that tough an opponent. They should be able to beat us. So I think we will actually shock the world. I think the Eagles are going to win this game. That said, I wouldn't be surprised if they lost. Like I said, from an X's and O's standpoint, we probably should lose this game. But I think it's one of those things about an NFL season where things happen that you don't expect, and I think that's what's going to happen in this particular instance. And I think the way that we've got to do it is we've got to do what I was saying we've been needing to do for the last couple of weeks, and that's Doug needs to commit to the running game, and hopefully his team will get through to him. That's what's happened in the past. If you recall, a couple of years ago when we beat the Chargers out in LA, the team had come to him and said, listen, we really need to rely more on the run game right now to get going, and that's what they did. LeGarrette Blount had a huge game that day, and we ended up winning that game. I think that's what happens in this game as well. I think Doug ends up, probably listening to his players, recognizing we're hurt. We need to keep Aaron Rodgers off the field. We need to shorten the game as well. So the way you do that, you run the ball, you establish the run, you win time of possession, you keep Aaron Rodgers on the sideline, and hopefully you're able to score points and it drives as well. So I think that's the approach we need to take in this game. I think Jordan Howard needs to be utilized a lot more. Hopefully he will be. Maybe that's wishful thinking on my part, but I think that's the way we've got to approach this game. For that reason, I am going to predict the Eagles win this game. So my prediction for a score is going to be Eagles 27, Packers 23. Like I said, X's and O's, we probably lose this game, but that's not always the way it works in the NFL. Let me know what you think, though. Leave your predictions below for what you think is going to happen in Thursday night's game. Also, let me know about studs and duds from the Detroit loss. Anybody I missed on either list? Is there anybody you would move from one list to the other? Some people blame Carson Wentz, wouldn't put him on the studs and would put him on the duds. Some people might think that Aguilar redeemed himself and would take him off the duds and put him on the studs. Let me know what you think below. Obviously, I'll check in after the game against the Packers and let you know what I thought about that. Until then, fly Eagles fly.